All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm excited to get this space started. I think it's a long overdue and very exciting conversation that is very close to my heart. Um, Hello, and welcome to today evening's conversation. This conversation is a Twitter space where we explore the nuances of India's pre-legislative consultation policy. My name is Antara Vasudev, and I'm the founder of Civis.board, a platform that works to enable effective dialogue between governments and citizens on draft laws and policies. And today, I'm also masquerading as the host for this exciting and promising conversation. Today, we hope to unpack what the pre-legislative consultation policy is all about, with two practitioners who have observed the space closely for a number of years. Our guests for today's conversation are Maansi Verma and Arun PS, both of whom need very little of an introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce them anyway. Before I introduce today's speakers, a quick reminder that this conversation is being recorded. If time permits, we will be taking questions from the audience. Please DM us at civis_vote and we'll be sure to take on your questions at the end. Now, I'm very excited to introduce Maansi and Arun, collaborators and friends who wear many hats and bring their signature passion to all the work that they do. Maansi Verma is a lawyer, public policy professional, and founder of the Madhyam Initiative. Through her initiative, she has ably assisted MPs with parliamentary work, supported civil society organizations with policy research and advocacy, and enabled critical citizen engagement with Parliament and participation in policymaking. Along with Maansi, we are joined by Arun. Arun PS is a public policy enthusiast whose academic research interests predominantly lie in enabling participatory democracy. A lawyer by education from the National Law University, Visakhapatnam, he has previously worked with members of the Kerala Legislative Assembly, members of Parliament, the National Institute of Rural Development, among other organizations. He currently leads the policy research wing at the Cochin Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you, Maansi and Arun, for joining us today. We are very excited to have you, and it's a great pleasure to introduce you today in this conversation. I'd now like to dive straight into some of the questions for this evening's conversation. Let's start with a quick primer on what this mouthful, the pre-legislative consultation policy, is all about. For those of us learning about PLCP, and that's what the acronym that we call the pre-legislative consultation policy, for those of us learning about the PLCP for the first time today, can both of you explain what it's all about in just about a sentence or a few words? Maansi, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Antra, and thanks for a very generous introduction as well. Really excited and happy to be a part of this conversation. Thank you for putting this together. So to answer your first question, the pre-legislative consultation policy of 2014 is essentially a guiding policy for all government ministries and departments to undertake public consultation on every proposed policy, law, rule, regulation while it is being formulated. So essentially, in simple words, it is about government speaking to people and taking their inputs before making a law for them.
Interesting. Thanks for that very succinct explanation, Maansi. Arun, tell us, what's it all about? Arun, there is a small chance that you might be on mute.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Sorry, yeah. So, pre-legislative consultation policy of Government of India is a policy of that requires the administrative departments and ministries to consult the public before finalizing policies such as draft laws, rules, regulations, etc. And it also requires like a minimum 30-day window period so that public can read, assess, and understand, and then give their feedback on the draft policies.
Thanks, Arun. Great point there about actually reading, assessing, and understanding. Mansi, I know that in a lot of your work, you focus on engaging critically as a citizen. I wanted to ask you both, but I'll start with Mansi. Why does the pre-legislative consultation policy appeal to you personally as a useful tool in India's democracy? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, Antara. I think my reasons for that would be three. One, it is about democracy in action, particularly in our kind of rather vibrant democracy where many different parties and interest groups are represented in parliament and our other representative institutions. Public consultations ensure that as many of these different groups, identities, and interests have their voices heard. Second, I think it is about choosing cooperation over coercion. So, when laws and policies are made in consultation with people, it is much easier to have their cooperation in implementation of these laws and policies later instead of forcing people to comply with laws and policies. And as we have seen in the recent past, for instance, with the farm laws, sometimes when you try and force people to comply with laws, it can have devastating consequences. And finally, I think it is about acknowledging that all wisdom to make laws and policies is not concentrated in the government alone. So, through these consultations, we acknowledge the dignity, agency, and capability of individuals to shape their own destinies through the laws and policies made for them. So, for instance, just like we have the concept of universal adult franchise, where we fundamentally believe that every adult, irrespective of where they come from, how educated they are, their gender, race, caste, color, religion, economic status, so all of these differences aside, every adult is considered capable of choosing their government. In the same belief, when we consult public on laws and policies, we look at it from the same fundamental belief that there are they are capable of deciding, shaping their own destinies through these laws and policies which are made for them. That's These are the three reasons because of which public consultations on laws and policies appeals to me.
Thanks, Mansi, for your thoughts. I have two reasons to believe that this is an interesting tool for India's democracy. First one being, I personally believe that we celebrate the role of citizens starting and ending inside the voting booth. So we call it Festival of Democracy and nothing beyond that. Citizens' engagement in India's democratic processes should not end in voting booth. And I personally believe that this policy has made that first step towards facilitating dialogue between policymakers and citizens. This is the first reason. Second thing, as Mansi rightly pointed out, some bureaucrat, some bureaucrat or officer in the state capital or national capital should not decide or arbitrarily decide as to what a particular set of stakeholders or public wants. There should be some kind of a stakeholder representation or stakeholder or consultation in the decision making processes, and PLCP seems to be one of the first useful tools towards institutionalization of a stronger participatory democracy.
Thanks, Arun. Mansi. I think both of you have sort of spoken about things that I feel actually need to go down as quotable quotes in some ways. Mansi talking about collaboration and cooperation over coercion, and Arun talking about this being pre-legislative consultation being one of the first frameworks that actually enables us to have an active role in our democracies beyond polling and beyond voting. Given that it's election season, I think this is a very pertinent conversation to be having as many states go to the polls as well, and many citizens look and examine their roles closely as a part of a democratic process. So thanks for that, both of you. And there are multiple points of what they have just shared that we're hoping to also uncover as the conversation goes along. I wanted to ask both of you again that we all look at different aspects of the PLCP process. Maansi, you look more closely at engaging with parliamentarians and citizens. Arun, you look at sourcing and tracking consultations. Could you tell us a little bit about what these pieces of the larger consultation play? Some of us may sort of view the consultation space as a monolith or a smaller space that doesn't have as many stakeholders or different things going on. So from that perspective, it's really interesting to me to look at the fact that we all have certain areas that we focus on and specialize on within the broader consultative space. So Maansi, I'd invite you to talk a little bit about Madhyam and also how engaging with parliamentarians builds this space. And then Arun, I'll come to you after that as well.
Sure. Thanks, Antara. So I think specifically with respect to engaging with parliamentarians, it needs to be seen from two perspectives. And at Madhyam, I try to enable both of these perspectives. So one is the formal mechanism through the standing committees, and I will explain that process a little bit in detail. And the second are the informal mechanisms, and both of them are extremely crucial. So first, talking about the formal mechanisms, as I said, which is through the parliament committees, and how this process usually works is that once a bill has reached parliament, and while it is not the kind of interactions or the kind of work that parliament committee does, and how different stakeholders can engage with the process of parliament committee is not limited to a bill alone. It goes beyond that, but right now I'm just taking the example of a bill. So once a bill reaches parliament and it gets referred to a committee for study, the committees usually invite comments from people, and they even invite some individuals to also come and interact with the committee in person. Now, in our parliamentary democracy, this is the only formal mechanism through which people can influence bills at this stage, which is the stage at which a bill has already reached parliament, and it is being studied by a committee, which is just one step short of the bill actually being passed and becoming a law. So this can also sort of be considered as the final stage at which the law and policy making process can formally be influenced by stakeholders and individuals and citizens. If this stage is missed, and this is why this becomes very crucial, if this stage is missed, and I can give some examples later on how that can happen, and once a bill is passed and made into an act, after that no effective consultation mechanisms are available to influence the law and policy making process. And at that point of time, perhaps the only two options available to people are either to protest or to go to the court to prevent a law from being implemented if it is problematic to that extent. And again, some examples from the recent past have seen both of these things happening. People have approached courts and people have also protested. So that is what makes this particular stage of bills being sent to committees and bills being studied by committees as a very, very important stage, which shouldn't ideally be missed. Also because this is the only formal mechanism for citizens to engage with their representatives, which are the parliamentarians, at the stage of formulation of laws. So up until this stage, what happens is that the entire formulation of law and policy is concentrated in the government. So it is the government, the different ministries, the different departments, which are preparing the drafts of the laws and policies, and they might do consultations, and that's something that Arun will speak in greater detail about. But once a bill reaches parliament, and if it is not sent to a committee, then there is no way how a citizen can engage with their representative, who are also lawmakers in their own right. So each MP in parliament and each MLA in an assembly is a lawmaker who has been voted for this very purpose. But if that stage is missed, then that formal mechanism and that formal process of engaging with your representative for the purpose of influencing a bill is entirely missed. There, the role of informal mechanisms become important, and that's also a stage where we sort of as Madhyam try to enable. So people have, and I mean, this is, since it is informal, it would be very difficult to explain how this plays out, but people, civil society organizations, individuals, different stakeholders, they make efforts to reach out to the MPs, and they make efforts to engage with them. They make efforts to convey their concerns, their issues, or with respect to a particular bill, and they have conversations on how MPs can raise those points in Parliament. MPs are also have always been open to actively seek feedback from people on law policy issues, particularly their constituents, on how they may be impacted and what kind of issues, according to them, their representative should be raising in Parliament. But this is a completely sort of like informal way in which these conversations happen, and it is a largely unexplored, undeveloped space, and also discouraged to some extent. A lot of people don't think that there's any point in reaching out to their MPs. People have all sorts of notions about how MPs might respond, or MPs or MLAs. I'm when I'm referring to MPs, I'm essentially including different representatives here. So this space is hasn't developed to that extent. However, in some more mature democracies, we see these kind of interactions happening more often, which we don't see as much in India. But again, if either the formal mechanism of interacting with your representatives through committee, or the informal mechanism of otherwise doing advocacy or lobbying with your representatives is missed, then that sort of creates a vacuum or a gap, because then there will be no continuous or effective feedback loop between people and their representatives. And this part of the consultation, because you say you spoke about the puzzle of consultation, so this is where this part fits. How people and their representatives can work together to take these concerns and raise these voices in Parliament.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Maansi, for talking about that and actually bringing up this very important and often there are a lot of misconceptions around this as well about elected representatives not being approachable, or people not being actually able to reach out to them. In my experience as well, and I'm sure many on this conversation would echo that, elected representatives are very, very approachable and open to actually speaking and listening to what you have to say. But oftentimes that first step of actually approaching them does need to come from the citizen who is concerned and who has that particular cause on the top of their minds. So thanks so much for taking us through that, Maansi. I'll also encourage everybody to follow Madhyam on Twitter. They do some incredible work on multiple platforms: Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, as well as the mailing list that Maansi runs. So do sign up to sort of stay engaged with what is happening in Parliament. Arun, coming to you. Maansi spoke about one piece of the puzzle. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do with PLCP Track and argov.in, and how that fits into the bigger puzzle? I see Sushmita is also joining us, so perhaps you'd like to talk a little bit about the work that you do on this front.
Yeah. So thanks, Maansi, for explaining why engaging with parliamentarians during the lawmaking stage is important. I'm trying to, or we are trying to do right now, is to try compile the information relating to public consultation in one place. So I'll tell you why I am doing what I'm doing. So when I was in my 4th year or 5th year of law school, when I was trying to track the implementation of this policy, so this is in 2017 or 16, 2 years after the policy, I was trying to track various draft consultations released by different departments, and it was very difficult for me to track individual websites and find out whether this department has done a consultation or not. We don't have a single point repository, where ideally a government should have maintained a single point repository for facilitating a conversation, but that didn't happen. And we thought there should be any information gap between the citizens and government. I'll cite one example: the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act. that was actually circulated for consultation in 2015 in a website called indiacitizenshiponline.nic.in, which is checked only by people who are interested in, say, getting Indian citizenship or revoking citizenship sort of stuff. So it is not regularly used by citizens or press. So this didn't get any press coverage at all. So as a result, there is a disconnect between the government and public, even in cases where there were public consultations happening. And we thought that should not happen. And I've been trying to, we have been trying to curate different consultations initiated by different departments and ministries at state and national level. So we are trying to kind of address that information gap. While mentioning about this, I would also like to mention about Civis, which is going a step ahead by trying to facilitate a conversation between citizens, collecting citizens' feedback and giving back to the government, which is one step we are trying to do. So we are happy that this is useful for various civil society organizations and other people. A lot of folks who follow the tech policy space in India have told that whatever we are doing is helping their regular policy work and all. So this is essentially what we are trying to solve in the larger consultation puzzle.
Thanks, Arun. I can't underscore enough how important it is to actually have this repository. Arun and his teammates, some of whom are on today's spaces as well, have go through extensive trouble to actually locate things from the Gazette. I learned a couple of hacks on how to actually effectively Google search for consultations, thanks to Arun's help early in 2018. So reach out to him for all of the hacks on figuring out how these consultations work, where they come up, and how you can actually do that role yourself of being the citizen sleuth, as we'd like to call it. Arun is available on Twitter, and you can see his handle through the Twitter Spaces. But he also runs a Telegram channel, a WordPress site, argav.in, and has a host of different ways through which he communicates these policies, including LinkedIn. So do give him a follow, because it is important work. And as Maansi often says, that it's important to be engaged, and when you engage, things change. So thank you both for the work that you do, but also for sharing that with us on today's call. Maansi, you mentioned briefly how Parliament and other statutory bodies have engaged with citizens through standing committees and other mechanisms. Would you like to talk a little bit about, beyond pre-legislative consultation, how citizens' engagement has come about in Indian parliamentary systems, and perhaps then after that, Arun could follow it up with what you've learned in this space after the PLCP policy came into being, and what's been happening since 2014.
Yes, Antara, thanks for that. So with respect to the pre-legislative consultation policy, which came around in 2014, and I think there's a very interesting anecdote I can share about when the PLCP was being formulated. So I was speaking to somebody who had engaged with the National Advisory Council, which had been set up under the UPA government at that point of time. And the National Advisory Council, essentially a body which brought together several members from the civil society, and they engaged closely with the government on formulating a number of rights-based welfare legislations. At that time, NAC had proposed bringing out PLCP as a law, which would obviously help much better with its compliance. But ultimately, when, though the government sort of accepted the idea of having a PLCP in place, that is having a policy in place for engaging with citizens and doing public consultations, but eventually it was brought out as a policy which is directory in nature, not mandatory. and not as a law. So that was sort of a step down from what the National Advisory Council had proposed. But what is interesting to see here is, then, because specifically you asked me about parliament committees, interesting to see that there is a very interesting link between the pre-legislative consultation policy and the parliamentary process, which is that the pre-legislative consultation policy says that all the inputs that a government gathers when it does consultation on any proposed law or policy should be placed before the parliament committee after the bill is introduced in parliament. So essentially it looks at the policy making process, or rather consultation in the policy making process, as a continuum, which doesn't end once the government has done its consultation and then the process sort of ends. It's not like that. So essentially it can be envisioned like this: the government comes up with a draft, then the government does its consultation on it. It opens it up for comments, people send in their inputs and their feedback, government speaks to different stakeholders. All of those inputs are used in the formulation of a first draft of a bill, which is then presented in parliament. But the consultation doesn't end there. It is envisaged. So again, I mean, this is sort of what was envisioned might not be happening, but what was envisioned was, then after that, once the bill has been introduced in parliament, then it will be sent to a committee for study, and all the inputs on which the government relied for the purpose of preparing that first draft will be placed before the committee also, and the committee will look at it. The committee will further invite comments, and after all of that consultation process, finally it will be taken up for discussion in parliament, and a bill will be passed and made into a law. So the PLCP, if you look at it, and I think a very visionary document, despite the fact that it is a policy and not really mandatory, talks about consultations at several stages, because at all of these different stages there are different actors involved. At on one hand, the first stage is where the government is taking the inputs. The second stage is where the parliamentarians are taking inputs. So all of these different actors. But I have in the years that I have been following parliament, I have never seen any government, even where they have done consultation on a bill before it is presented in parliament, for it to place those comments before the committee. I've never seen that happen. So that's one way in which the mandate of the PLCP is definitely not being followed. But what is also worrisome is that even the number of bills being sent to the committee for study has drastically reduced, and this is based on research being done by PRS Legislative Research, which have found that basically from and this statistic goes back to the 14th Lok Sabha, which was essentially the 2004-2009 period. At that point of time, about 60% of all bills being introduced in parliament were sent to a standing committee for study. This number went up to 71% of all bills in the 15th Lok Sabha, that is the 2009-2014 period. And what we've seen since 2014 is that this number has fallen sharply. In the 16th Lok Sabha, which is the 2014-2019 period, only 27% of all the bills were sent to committee for study. And since 2019, in the current Lok Sabha, we have only seen about 12% of bills being studied by committee. So as I had mentioned earlier in my earlier response, that this is the only formal mechanism through which citizens can engage with their parliamentarians on a proposed bill or policy. And if this stage is missed, then you have no effective consultation mechanism available after this. And when we see less and less number of bills being sent to committee for study, it disempowers both the citizens as well as their representatives. So yes, I'll end here.
Thank you, Maansi. Absolutely. And I can't also, again, as you mentioned, this one of the points that actually comes to mind is that despite being a somewhat niche space of civic engagement that we are working in, the power of this data to actually know how trends are moving and how different attitudes are being taken towards citizen engagement is actually really empowering for a lot of us who are doing work in this space. So I would again encourage everyone to take a minute or two to actually look into some of these trends. There's a lot of interesting data out there, and you can definitely reach out to us if you are also trying to make sense of what's happening in this arena. So before I invite Arun to tell us a little bit more and give us a little bit more data and insights on what's been happening since 2014, I just want to mention again that we will have a few minutes to take questions right at the end. And we have a really engaged audience with us today. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to DM us at civis_vote. And we will facilitate the questions right at the end of this conversation. Over to you, Arun. Can you tell us what's been happening in the public consultation domain in terms of data and how it has been progressing since 2014?
There is a welcome trend that is almost like 155 bills, at least 155 bills have been circulated by various departments since 2014, which is a welcome change. Like before that, hardly during the UPA 1 and UPA 2, hardly like a 10-15 bills would have gone through consultation, and most of them were the social security side of bills and not the general ones. So from that perspective, we have had a welcome change. But out of the 301 odd bills that were introduced in Parliament since 2014, 227 bills have not undergone this prior consultation before introduction. That means almost like 75% of the bills introduced in Parliament have not been subject to prior public consultations. So these bills are rushed through in the Parliament also, and as a result, rightly pointed out by Maansi, so public is completely paralyzed. Parliament is also completely paralyzed. Many important bills, like say, for example, RTA Amendment Bill, Kashmir Reorganization Bill, Farm Bills, Triple Talaq Bill, Voter ID Aadhaar Linking Bill, UAPA Amendment Bill, Aadhaar Amendment Bill, all of them were introduced in the Parliament without any public consultation, and these were rushed through in the Parliament without proper parliamentary scrutiny and all. So there is a welcome trend and there is a dangerous like non-adherence trend also. So this is how the data looks like from the implementation point of view right now.
Right. Thanks, Arun. So that actually gets me to think that public consultations are a fairly nascent domain in India. And I have a few questions before we close out today's conversation. I'll just share with you, Maansi and Arun, the order in which I think we could perhaps take them. The first question, building on what you have both just shared, is what are some of the areas where you believe that PLCP needs improvement as it's implemented today? If you could shed light on that, and then perhaps after that, after we hear your responses to that, we can also understand from you what are the examples where PLCP was done well. So on the challenges and what needs to be learned, Maansi, would you like to go first?
Sure, Antara. I think I will, where PLCP needs to improve. I think first of all, the point that I mentioned in my last, in my last response also, that it is essentially as of now treated as a direction, as a discretionary power for the government, where it feels or where it is comfortable doing consultation, it does. Where it is not, it can choose not to. So I think one of the challenges in its implementation definitely is that it is right now not considered mandatory. It should be made mandatory, and I think in this regard, it's interesting to see very recently Supriya Sule, who is a member of Parliament in Lok Sabha, introduced a private member bill making pre-legislative, asking for pre-legislative consultation policy, the process to be made mandatory. So I think that's a challenge which needs to be overcome. The second is that there is not a lot of transparency around the process. So again, I mean, the government decides as per its own unknown parameters when it wants to do consultation and when it doesn't. And even after that, there is not a lot of transparency on what comments come in. And for instance, if I were to give an example of, for instance, the committee which was set up by the government to work on the first version of the Personal Data Protection Bill, the B. N. Shri Krishna Committee, people had to file RTIs to ask the committee to disclose the comments which the committee received when it opened it for comments. And I think that kind of process is, just completely goes against the idea of doing a consultation, because essentially in a democracy it should be open. If there are groups, if there are individuals, if there are citizens who are sharing their inputs and comments on a particular policy or a law, that should be open for everyone to see. And I think because you also spoke about a good example, I would here give the example of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, which actually follows a really good consultation process before it comes out with any law or policy. So it makes its consultation paper available on its website online, on which then people can send in their comments, and then it publishes all those comments on its website as well. So you can actually see who all have sent in their comments, what their comments have been, and then in some cases it also invites counter comments. So that kind of process where you enable this kind of transparency is also very good, because then it sort of creates a level playing field, and then you know that there are no groups or organizations who are trying to do some backdoor advocacy or lobbying to influence a policy, and it's sort of all out in the open, and that can be very empowering for citizens as well. And I think the third point is, and this I think Arun brought up in his point, which was that there is no single repository. The government has made some effort in this direction by building the MyGov portal. But I don't know, I mean, every time I've visited the MyGov portal, it just seems like most of the things that's happening there are logo writing contests and slogan writing contests, and very few actual consultations. But that's a start. The government seems to be moving towards creating a repository where all the consultations or all policies on which it is inviting comments are available online on the MyGov portal, and people can go there and give in their comments. But I think even as the government moves towards this, I think the challenges of it not being mandatory and there being no transparency around the process need to be handled. And one final thing I will mention here is that recently, in the first part of the budget session of Parliament, there was a question which was raised in Parliament where the government was asked if it was tracking the implementation of the pre-legislative consultation policy. Essentially, if it was tracking if the different governments, departments, and ministries are complying with the requirements of the PLCP. And the government simply said no, that this is something that we are not doing. So again, it all sort of ties back to the fact that this is not mandatory, and therefore it is open to the government to exercise its discretion. And I think that sort of strikes at the very root of why PLCP is important and everything else that we have discussed so far. Thanks.
Thanks, Maansi. If the number of claps that I was trying to communicate through the emojis were any indication, I can't agree with you more. I think there is a lot to be done in this space, but I'm also inspired that there are a group of people who are coming together like we are today to actually talk about this and try and understand how we can ensure greater compliance. Another quick shout out for any questions from the audience. We will be taking questions, and in case you had any trouble DMing us before, please do try again, because we're very interested to hear everything that you have to say and answer some of the questions that are coming up. Arun, coming to you now, could you tell us a little bit about the areas or the scope for improvement, as well as perhaps one example of a consultation done well in your experience?
Fact that the current policy, the enforceability factor is minimal. Even if you go to court, most courts are ignoring the existence of this policy, and so because this is not a statutory or constitutional right that we have. So a first or a solid step towards institutionalizing this would be having this in the form of a constitutional or a statutory. even Petroleum Regulatory Board and all, they reveal almost all the submissions, like all the submissions made to the board and the regulator. You can get to know what corporate A has submitted to the regulator and what impact that has had on the policy. You can do submission impact on policy mapping and if you're serious about this. So that kind of transparency is what we should be aspiring for. And coming back to an example that has been kind of successful, can be considered as a successful consultation. I always rely back on this Save the Internet campaign that happened immediately after TRI circulated a consultation paper on net neutrality. Number of stakeholders, including civil society activists, YouTube channels like All India Bakchod, and the current Internet Freedom Foundation and various other civil society organizations had collaborated, and they launched a campaign website, and as a result almost like 10 lakh people submitted their grievances to the Telecom Regulatory Authority, and multiple events happened after that. And as a result, apparently, we have one of the most advanced net neutrality regulations in the world. So this is, according to me, one of the best outcome of a consultation example. And also, like, from a personal point of view, I participated in a number of consultations as an individual and as a personal experience. I happened to participate in some consultations in Kerala, and that has had impact. So me and my friend Sushma, we submitted our inputs to the Kerala government on a important definition relating to sustainable buildings in Kerala, and the definition right now has incorporated majority of the suggestions that we provided, and that is now a law in Kerala right now. So I personally feel that consultation window period is a time when policymakers are, to an extent compared to normal situation, ready to listen. One should not miss certain such opportunities, is what I personally would recommend.
Thanks, Arun. So what I'm hearing is institutionalization and transparency are two of the key aspects that we do need to ensure that the PLCP is successful going forward, and I couldn't agree more. Just to add to that, I think another key aspect is also citizens' ability and awareness to know and use the tools that are presented to us as a parliamentary democracy. I think that is equally important to ensure that there is greater value seen in the public consultation process. So I had one more question, but I think we have a lot of audience questions that are coming in. So I'm going to pause on the question that I wanted to ask you. One of the things that we have a question from Vaishnavi. Maansi, this would be great to get your inputs on. Vaishnavi asks, why are the officers of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha so hesitant to allow publishing of written and oral submissions to the standing committees? Due to such secrecy, people are in the dark about the contents of all submissions, and this may enable vested interests to influence lawmaking. So, any thoughts, Maansi, on this?
Yes, and thanks for that question, Vaishnavi. On the process of parliament committees, actually there are various improvements, desirable improvements in the process. I think one of the first things is that the parliament committee process is completely happens behind closed doors, and a lot of people have raised concern on this. Essentially on the fact that especially where the committees are interacting with experts, or they are taking evidence from external people, and we have seen, actually we have seen these kind of proceedings playing out in other countries, right? We have seen the kind of testimonies that the Facebook founder gave before the Senate in the United States. And we have actually seen these kind of proceedings playing out from other countries. But in our country, we do not have access to this kind of information. And one very interesting example of this could be that when the Joint Parliament Committee on the Personal Data Protection Bill was doing its deliberation on that bill, and they had invited a lot of people to present before the committee. And I did a quick research and analysis from data which is publicly available on the Lok Sabha website. So the Lok Sabha website does make available who were the people who presented before the committee, and it showed that the committee, of all the people that the committee met, I think a greater majority, like about 70-80% of them were stakeholders from the private sector and corporates. And very few civil society individuals were able to present their inputs in person before the committee. So while there is, some information available on what kind of proceedings are going on, and of course, every once in a while, things do get leaked to media, and we come to know what kind of inputs are being presented. But yes, other than that, so that that is one major improvement which is required. And the second is that as far as submissions are concerned, again, I don't see any reason on why those submissions should be treated as confidential. But as of now, every time a committee invites comments from people, it is treated as confidential, and they are only made public after the committee publishes its report. So at that point of time, they do make those comments public. They also make public the names of all the stakeholders from whom they received the comments. But till the committee is undertaking the process of consultation and study of a bill, that information sort of doesn't come out in the open. And I think I completely agree with you that this is something on which improvement for the sake of transparency is definitely required.
Thanks, Maansi. I think that's a very valid point, and thank you all so much for asking such interesting questions. We have a few more questions coming in. So, Arun, in the interest of time, I'll just combine two questions that Pranesh has asked. One is that does the PLCP require publication of received comments, building on what Maansi just shared? Secondly, what is being done at the state and local levels? Can we aim for similar laws on PLCP to be enacted at the state and local level? If you could take on these two questions, Arun, and then we'll ask some more of the audience questions. Arun, you may be speaking on mute.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah. Thanks, Pranesh, for those questions. Responding to the first question, the administrative department or ministry is not mandated to publish all these comments, but the policy says that the summary of feedback or comments should be placed in the website of the ministry, which is not happening. I guess in the 155 odd consultation that happened, I've not seen more than like 3-4 instances, and that too very rare also. So this is the general trend. And second question being the similar laws being implemented in state level, right? So there, I guess Rajasthan is making some steps towards institutionalizing a social accountability bill where pre-legislative consultation is also a part. They made the announcement in 2018 December, if I'm not wrong, but then they apparently did not implement it, and right now activists from MKSS, Aruna Roy, Nikhil De, and all are protesting on ground, seeking immediate implementation of this social accountability legislation. So other than that, I'm not very aware of any other piece of legislation in any other state where this framework is being discussed.
If I can very quickly, add to that point, because Arun mentioned the Rajasthan experiment with social accountability, and I think it's very, very interesting because a lot of these welfare legislations, like RTI, Narega, right to food, etc., can find their root in social movements started in Rajasthan by different civil society groups. So I think that's also a rather unexplored element of citizen engagement and public consultation, where the entire process is sort of grounded in these kind of movements. It starts as a demand from bottom up, and then it gathers momentum, and it finally reaches the policy making spaces, and the government sort of responds to it. So I just wanted to quickly bring in that element also, that how all these movements, and since he mentioned about the social accountability, and there is a movement brewing in Rajasthan right now asking for that bill, asking for a law on social accountability, and the rich history of how RTI, Narega, and a lot of these welfare legislations came about through these citizen movements should also be seen, I think, as a success of consultations and citizen engagement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have a related and interesting question on what citizens can do to actually promote the pre-legislative policy and policy transparency. So I think if you don't mind, I'm going to just jump in here with a couple of things, a couple of easy steps, easy wins that we can actually work on. And I'd like to start by saying that a little bit of greater awareness on the policy itself and taking everyday steps to ensure that people around you are also aware of this citizen superpower, as I like to call it, that can actually help with the pre-legislative consultation policy tremendously. The second thing that can help, which is perhaps maybe one step ahead, is coming in and actually sharing your feedback, engaging with the government on these public consultations. And the reason that that helps is because every response that we give, there's often a preconceived notion that we need to be an expert of some sort, or actually have some sort of fancy degree to be able to comment on these policies. But the fact of the matter is that it's our lived experiences that enrich the law in the most prolific way. So participating in public consultations is another step that each one of us can take. And I think the combination of both of these things, the combination of awareness and building awareness is one thing, and actually participating and engaging also shows tremendous value in how the process can be beneficial for government bodies, for elected representatives, and others in the ecosystem as well. So at a top level, quick 30-second take, I think that is something that each one of us can do. But even over and above that, it's great to see organizations, three different organizations and entities who are working in this space come together here today. I'd like to make a sort of open call for any other individuals, organizations, people interested in this space who would like to partner in any way. I think you know where to reach us. We'd be more than happy to sort of engage with you and also create a little bit more of a push for public consultations in India. I'll pause there. We have one more question that I think, Maansi, maybe you could take on. One question has come in from Sunil, which is how can a citizen engage with representatives for reforms, for example, perhaps police reforms? Or how do we check the names of representatives on parliamentary committees and the number of committees when they've met, etc.? So if you could give us a couple of handy tips on this front as well, I think that would be great.
Yes, thanks for that question. So actually, a lot of this information is available on Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha website. I spend a lot of time looking at these websites, but I know that these are relatively unexplored areas. A lot of people don't know the kind of resources which are available and on these websites. Just to like give an example, if you go on Rajya Sabha website and if you go on the list of MPs which are available, and they have prepared like a profile page for each MP there, you can actually find all the information that you just asked for. That is, how to contact these MPs. So their contact details are available there. You will know the kind of questions they have asked. So that can give you some idea of, the sort of the interests that an MP has, or the kind of subjects that they have been raising in Parliament. You will also get information on the committees that they are part of. You will also get information on the debates that they have participated in, again, to sort of give you an idea of, what kind of topics the MP is usually interested in raising. And in my experience of working with organizations doing advocacy, we find this information to be very, very useful, because this helps us, determine when we are trying to reach out to MPs, how responsive they might be to our advocacy efforts. With respect to your general question on, and also this one other thing that you asked about, when the committees are meeting and what issues they are discussing, all of this information is available on Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha website. I think it's about going there and just spending a little bit of time to sort of familiarize yourself with the websites. But I think all those people who I have referred these websites to for the purpose of gathering all this information, they've found these to be extremely useful, like a treasure trove of information, on not just on what is happening in Parliament, but also for anyone who's looking to do advocacy. These can be very, very useful. And I think finally, when you asked about how citizens can reach out to MPs, I think you'd be surprised, and this has been sort of my experience also. You'd be surprised at how many MPs, if you just call them up on the number that's available on the website, how many times the MPs themselves would be answering their call, and if not, they'd be returning your call also. So there are many MPs who are quite accessible, who are open to talking to people, responding to emails. There are so many MPs, if I have shared inputs with them online on email, and I get almost like instant response from them. There are a lot of MPs who are open to engaging with people on social media, who are open to meeting people in their offices. And again, I have helped in arranging for these kind of interactions and meetings. A lot of MPs come together to discuss issues in roundtables, webinars, seminars. So actually avenues are many, but again, as I said, that these kind of interactions remain relatively unexplored. A lot of people, like Antara also mentioned, may have some preconceived notions about the fact that these kind of advocacy efforts might not lead to anything, MPs might not respond, or these kind of things. But actually, that's not the case. And in my work, I've always encouraged, whether these are organizations or individuals who are working on issues and looking to do advocacy, to actively reach out to MPs and share your inputs with them. And you'd be surprised with the kind of responses you get.
Thanks, Maansi. Another favorite anecdote in this space is if you ever want a good cup of chai, feel free to walk into your elected representative's office. They will always give you a sweet, sugary cup of chai and be happy to discuss a lot of the concerns that you have, and also share where they are stuck in their own processes. We are almost at time for today's Twitter Spaces conversation, and I want to just take a second to thank all of you for being such an engaged audience, and of course Maansi and Arun for contributing to this space. Before we close, any last thoughts, closing lines that you'd like to share with our audience who is leaving this conversation thinking about PLCP and the possibilities that it has? Maansi, would you like to go first?
Sure, Antara. I think I would just reiterate something that both of you have already said. I would just say that avenues are many and possibilities are multifold. As citizens, the first thing to do is to overcome the hesitation of participating in these processes. And then the second thing to do is to find, platforms like Civis, or the kind of work that Arun is doing, or the kind of work that we are trying to facilitate at Madhyam. There are, every time I have seen, like a law or policy being put out for comments, there are, groups and organizations which come together to respond to it. So it's always possible. If you think that it might be something you can't do alone, there are always groups and organizations that you can be a part of, and and contribute to the law and policy making process. So my only, I think, parting thoughts would be that this is this is a power and an opportunity which I think citizens should not miss to exercise at every opportunity that they get.
Thank you, Maansi. Arun, what about you?
So in addition to whatever mentioned in the conversation, a question on how to reach out to the parliamentarians got me back to sometime in 2014 when I randomly went to my MP in Thrissur constituency and asked him whether I can help him. He readily accepted. So that was surprising to me because I never thought that they would be ready to accept inputs from a random player. So I personally believe that when there is a consultation window or when there is an opportunity to interact with policymakers, I'm sure that they would be ready to accept suggestions or ready to listen at least. Acceptance part may be questionable, but then utilize all these opportunities that you have to interact with policymakers. A lot of cases when the consultations have resulted in controversial results, the government has kind of put a hold on the policy decision itself. Like the geospatial bill was released in 2016 or 17, I guess, when a lot of people who are involved in the Save the Internet campaign, they started the Save the Map campaign. And as a result, they've at least on paper put a hold on the the geospatial bill. So whenever there is an opportunity, staying silent wouldn't really be a right choice. Exercise your right to dissent or give out your opinion and then wait for the change.
Thanks, Arun. Exceptionally important point on not just how staying silent is not valuable or viable in the long run, I should say, but also on waiting for change. Change is a game that needs a little bit of patience, especially in complicated arenas like public consultations and public policy. With that, each and every one of you has been incredibly patient to tune into our conversation today. And I would like to extend immense gratitude to both Maansi and Arun for participating in today's discussion. I know that there are a few questions that went unanswered. Please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'd be happy to take you through some of the answers. And we'll also try and put out a little bit of collateral to explain how some of these questions that went unanswered. That's all from us for today. Thanks again, Maansi and Arun. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much, Antara. It was a pleasure to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Antara, Civis, and the viewers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.